Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. George Smith here with Augmentt, and as part two of our SaaSy Sales series, I'm delighted to be joined by Danny Boyle. Hi, Danny, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Really glad to be here.
Good. And Danny, just for the folks who are live with us here today, or maybe viewing this in the future, do you mind just telling us who you are, where you're from, a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. So as you guys can probably tell, I'm from the UK. Been working in the IT industry now, specifically tailored towards MSP business and also large IT enterprises for the last 8 to 10 years. Prior to that point, I used to work in one of the largest telecom providers in the UK, and part of my main role there was helping others on the traditional and typical sales journeys. And one of my big key factors that I love to focus on is the hidden details behind the sales cycle and all the little things that anybody can say over the phone that can make a big difference in the outcome. And when I walked into the MSP world for the first time, it was very clear after a few years of working with partners quite intently that sometimes they're amiss from the cycle, and it's not due to ignorance. It's just purely they wasn't aware that there is an implementation journey and a process, just like there is in IT, when it comes to deploying any type of software or any other type of journey. So that's where I've come from, and that's where I am now. I'm representing Ninja. We're one of the largest RMMs globally. Obviously, got a huge focus in both the US audience and also in the UK. And my current role is I look after the key accounts in the UK, which is why I still continue to work with a lot of partners.
But yeah, it's great to hear your experience. You kind of going back in my own. I remember starting off sales actually in I'll not name them, but a very sharkish sort of UK based telephone shop,
Yeah.
and definitely got the 101 in sales there, and kind of same as your story and the things you're touching on, and then we can go in a bit more detail, Danny. That I think there's so many people, particularly in the channel, very technically strong, super intelligent when it comes to IT, but often don't really get the opportunity to kind of go through some of the simple basic 101 sales bits and pieces. When implemented, can really help steer a conversation in the right direction, and also just have awareness of some of the key things to look out for, both as positive indicators and maybe some negative signals as well, that you kind of want to make sure you're picking up on, so that you're not compounding some of those bits and pieces. You definitely come from some experience and continue to do that today. So much so that you've wrote a book about it, I believe. Dan, you mind just sharing a little bit more with us about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's something that's I'm incredibly proud of, as you can imagine, especially from the local little town that I'm from. No one kind of does anything special with the life. So for me, during COVID, I'm not going to beat around the bush, but I hit a rock bottom when it comes to my mental health and being trapped in the same four walls, like a lot of us had to do for multiple months. I have always been an outside cat, and I've always liked the ability to basically go and do a lot of adventures and travel. And when I was very restricted, I needed something to focus on. And just based on the pure experience of years of working with people, both on and off the field, and also in and outside of business, um, there was just because you automatically assume everybody else in the world knows as well. And it's only when you take a step back and realize that there's actually a method to the madness. I just wholeheartedly committed myself to starting to write. And yeah, as you can tell with my language, I write in the same format as I speak. So it's meant to be easily legible, and it's pick and go kind of style book where it takes you through the whole start to the end of the process, and it leaves no stone uncovered. And yeah, it's just something I'm very passionate about, and hopefully I can share a few tips and a little bit of wisdom as part of this call.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. And I would say, someone who's read the book and spoken to some other people on the channel who've done the same. I mean, I think it definitely hits a nail on the head for a lot of people, where you know what, sometimes simple is better, and quality over quantity as well. And so, I love even the title of the book, Sell More, Do Less. I think in this day and age, there is so much information out there, and so many things that business owners and MSPs can sink their teeth into. But really what everyone's looking for are efficiencies, automations, tips and tricks, little cheat codes that can really help them deliver the services that they're looking to deliver and kind of be successful. So with that in mind, Danny, yeah, we'd love to kind of get started and pick your brain about a couple of bits and pieces to do with sales and some of the elements from your book. And I know that you got a couple of slides to share with us that to kind of help guide that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to cover a little bit more of the reasoning behind why I've decided to do this. So I spend many years, as you know as well, like going up and down the UK and worldwide, attending events, and it seems to be a very common trend to be told where you should be investing your money and what you should be putting it towards. And my experience, especially working with a lot of people, is it's important to actually understand there's a lot more that you could do without actually spending any tremendous amount of money in the interim. So that's one of the big reasons as to why I've tried to design it the way I have. And by a country mile, one of the big key configurations as to why people are really frustrated and also struggling with the basic concept of sales is to do with the qualifying stages. And there is many different versions available, as you can imagine, especially when it comes to qualifying a lead. But the one that I follow, and it's something that I've also been involved with for many years, is bank out. And what this involves, hopefully you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it
Yeah,
bank out there. Thank you.
exactly. So sales is something that often people, I wouldn't say fear, but can easily put people off. And it's always a little bit of a challenge. But again, just like my logical side of my brain is that it's simply a process that just needs to be followed. And so when you're on the phone to a lot of end users, and this is the same for IT personnel too, they will often be generating at least 4 or 5 points on this list as part of the standard conversation. But what I always notice is that it's very rarely referred to or even written down. So what I like to do is to put this process in place where it's a very easy reminder so that you can understand and quite clearly like identify which pillars of the qualifying stage is going to be important to you. So what I love to do is to have this put in place and put it in bullet point format, just so that you can understand specifically what you're trying to achieve during the call. You can obviously set goals and reminders as to what's important to you and how far you want to push your luck in retrospect. But the long and short of it is the budget's obviously incredibly important, and especially in the UK, not everybody is willing to give you that type of information straight from the off because they see you and appear as a salesman. So they want to keep their cards quite close to their chest. The authority, we're seeing more and more as the years develop now. There's a lot more committees involved than there used to be. There's a lot more split personality and responsibility traits, which are involved in every single type of company and organization. So it's harder to understand if there is one ringleader that's getting the sign off or if there's multiple people as part of that decision-making process. The need is very simple. It's, the USP is what it is that's causing them pain. It might be something that's to do typically with the time element, it might be the support, it might be the service that they're receiving, or in general, it might be the experience. So it's incredibly pivotal. And there's hundreds and thousands of different resources out there in the world who are all focused on the pain points and the job to be done. So that's incredibly important. Moving on from that, obviously, we've got the competition. So it's who you're up against. We live in a world now where any new invention will quickly follow after 1 year's time with at least 6 or 7 other major competitors because it's that aggressive. And more so than not in the IT world, there is least probably 100 to 200 different solutions for every type of angle that you want to look into in the SaaS industry. So it's incredibly competitive, and it's really good to understand who you're up against, because the more competitors that your end users or potential end users are looking into, the lower down the funnel in the sales pipeline it could be. The opportunity size is obviously incredibly important. The U stands for unique. Why is it that they're looking at you? Is it because you are trusted as an advisor? People still buy from people this day and age. So is it that, are you the reason that they're coming towards because of word of mouth? Is it the actual company that you represent that they're being drawn towards, or the product itself? So it could be a combination of three, or it could be a mix and a mix and match. And the big one for me is always the timeline. It's usually more often than not the most misleading part of the sales cycle that we get told, and it's not because it's intentional. It's usually because end users and customers are often quite drawn to tell us what we want to hear. And so there's little different ways of getting around that, just with the persuasion and the influential language that you can use, which I'll cover very shortly, which can make a huge difference in trying to figure out what their specific time frame is and when they actually want to implement. And it helps you to gauge your qualifying of a lead, because if you can note this down at the end of a call and just spend literally 30 seconds to 60 seconds just to retain this information, it will mean the rest of your pipeline and the rest of your funnel cleansing will be much simpler and easier to understand and comprehend and return to at a later date the next time that you follow up for the customer. And it's always a little bit of a difficult cycle when it comes to how you come across to an audience. And to explain this in more detail, Jordan Peterson, who's obviously an incredibly, let's say, interesting figure in the psychiatry world. He's well known for his controversial views, but he did say one thing that stuck with me, and it's that everybody is either interested in things or people. And your job and your career is often driven towards what you are more interested in. So for instance, if you're interested in things, you're more likely to be an engineer, you're more likely to be a technician, anything that involves a very hands-on labor type approach. Things that don't talk back, we don't like that type of thing, that interaction. Whereas people who are more interested in the relationship side and the conversational side, what you often find is that they're more likely to be salesmen, they're more likely to be teachers, they're more likely to be care workers, they're more likely to be involved in any type of public domain. And what I see a lot, especially in IT, is when they're pitching something, especially because they're more drawn towards things rather than people, is a very obvious disconnect between the logical side of the brain and the emotional side of the brain. Anybody who's interested in things tends to draw down the logic and go down the route of highlighting and talking to everybody about the features and the benefits. However, a lot of end users, they're actually more drawn towards the emotional side of why a customer would actually need and require this. How much time is it going to save them? How much pain is it going to get rid of? And so when a pitch or a quotation is coming across, it's really important to understand that you've got that connection between the two. Because if it's even slightly wrong, it will end up like a piece of gym equipment, in your shed or in your garage somewhere. You may buy it, exactly that emotionally it's the right idea. Logically it's the right idea, but emotionally you're not connected to make that a well-deserved purchase. So it can often be something that just falls by the wayside. And that's one of the things that I love to drill in as part of a conversation that I'm going through with my clients, is just to understand that there's a connection. Every single thing that we buy in life, there's a logical side of our brain that's telling us why this is important, and there's an emotional side of our brain that's telling us how this is important.
So Danny, whenever you're having those conversations, do you feel that's an important step or thing to be cognizant of is whenever you're speaking to someone, depending who they are at your customer level, to try and determine if they are a more logical person or a more emotional person? Like, are they more interested in people or the thing, and then cater your approach to each? Or are you trying to steer it to more towards a logical conversation or more of an emotional conversation?
I tend to work towards the emotional stage, because that's the bit that pulls at the heartstrings and can create the urgency as to why the customer needs to buy this. If you go down the route of logical, everybody can talk in a logical sense, and it just becomes the world of features and benefits. So you need a combination of the two. Now, there has been quite a lot of work done about this, and I too have written about it, but the buyer persona that we all have, there's at least 1 to 4 different buyer personas that everybody can work towards just strictly from day one. They can start this process, and it's basically to help you understand exactly what type of clientele what type of categories your clientele or your potential end users will fall into. And there's lots of different reasons as to, you may look at your end user customer base and realize there's no connection at all, but traditionally and statistically speaking, there is a different connection that can be made, and just understanding your audience can make a big difference in the type of messaging and how you want to portray that. So I would definitely say it's 100% a combination of the two, but it's the emotional connection that can create the urgency in the call.
Got it.
And a lot of things that we talk about on a regular basis as well can help you to carry and convey that message across to the audience. And one thing that I always notice, especially, is how you can be incredibly relatable start from the moment go. So one thing, and this is kind of adapted from Jordan Belfort, who is the world-renowned Wolf of Wall Street. So he's got a very good best-selling book, especially orientated around sales, and it's all dictated based on how he did it back then, and how that can obviously convey across to the modern day of selling. And so he had a chapter which is called The First 4 Seconds, and the 3 different criteria in which you need to be incredibly relevant in order to make the best impression possible and start your conversations and your communication with your customers on the right level. So the 3 things that he mentioned is, it's a very American term, but obviously sharp as a pin, sharp as a tack. It's a whole enthusiasm, it's the confidence, it's the reason why you are who you are. You've got to be trusted, and especially if it's a first time phone call, you've got to literally lead with your front foot. And it's easier said than done, because sales is a very daunting world, and if someone in IT is not traditionally gone down that route before, it can be incredibly off-putting, and the anxiety and the stress can obviously overwhelm them a little bit. So there's lots of different propositions and solutions how they can overcome that. But as a very core message, in the first 4 seconds and 15 seconds, it's important to be sharp and enthusiastic. And an expert in your field is just a no-brainer, but it needs to come across that you know specifically what you're talking about from the moment go. But by adaptation that I've written about is the first 15 seconds, because as part of the conversation, there's always, especially at the start of the call, when you have no relationship at all with this customer, it's important to be relatable as soon as possible. So anything that you can do to find that common ground and drive those walls as low as possible will help you in the long run. And one of the tactics I use, which is specifically very helpful in the UK, but also it does work worldwide, is to have a relatable story that has happened to you that day. And to give you a little bit of an example, hairdressers and taxi drivers use this all the time, because they understand if they can have the customer engaged and really happy throughout from the start, from cradle to grave, from the start of the process to the end, then they know that, 1, the customer is very likely to come back. 2, it will help with their reviews, case studies, and overall promotion of their own business that they're trying to strive towards. And also the 3rd reason is it's more likely to end in a tip, which, especially with waiters, with barbers, hairdressers, taxi drivers, all that is pivotal around the conversation. And
And it
so
humanizes the process as well, doesn't it, Danny? It kind of brings that human element in as well, right? So I think that, with all of those examples, a wall can go up pretty quickly once people realize that you're a salesperson, right? We've all been there, right? The people in the street asking for donations for certain, organizations, or you go into a shop and people are like, is there anything I can help with? And you're just like, just please leave it. There's a wall that goes up. And there's a difference between good and bad salespeople. I think it was actually a talk I saw with Jordan Belfort himself that said, it's in the first few milliseconds before even you've
Yeah,
opened your mouth. People will make up their mind about you, whether they like you or whether they don't. Now that can very quickly change based on the next 15 seconds, the next minute, etc.
yeah,
But it's just funny that that's an automatic quick fire response in your brain that you're probably not even consciously aware of, based on eye contact, gender, the general vibe of that person,
yeah,
right? And so whenever you are trying to engage with people, leading up to and having that sales conversation, when you're trying to get a sale, it's so important to be
yeah,
aware of that, and kind of
yeah.
put that persona out there.
Yeah, it's huge because we do this all the time with our friends and family at home. You know, we've had a bad day, we come home, you speak to the missus for the first time, you go, don't, I've had a nightmare. And so one thing that I like to do is I like to bring all of these real stories that none of it is made up, and please do not make this up. This is definitely not my advice, but there's a lot of little things that we all experience on a day-to-day basis that we can easily speak about, and we do at home with our friends and family, about the positives in your day, about the negatives in your day. So I love to do that. So one of the things that I always try and include, especially when it's the first time that I'm speaking to customers, is there is a how are you section. And when it comes back to me, because obviously in tennis it always does come back, I'll say, oh, I've had a nightmare. I've spent the last hour sending 10 emails and I got 20 back, so I can't catch up. It's something so simple, but if you can actually highlight all the little things that can frustrate you, or give you all your little wins and successes. Went to a new restaurant yesterday, it was brilliant. It's relatable. A customer understands straight away from the very first moment that you're human. You're not a robot. You're not only interested in what they have to buy or what they have to sell. Instead, you've taken it completely off skew. The guards are down, and then all of a sudden you'll find that the conversation will get a lot stronger because immediately you're more open. And some of the things that I love to work on with my clients is little differences of what they can say during a phone call to get the outcome that they want. And there's a little way of changing certain areas in their language where they can easily be more influential. And I worked with a partner only about 6 months ago, and one of his biggest objections and problems was getting customers to sign up to a quarterly review, because for him it was a prime opportunity to see if there's any generation in cross-selling cross-sell leads. So he wanted to go into this format so that he can just simply ask them to a review. That was all it is. He didn't get tremendous results when he was doing it on his own, and so he asked me to listen to a few of his calls, and this is where we found this information out. He was asking a very, very close question, which is, can I book you in for a meeting? Now, it seems incredibly harmless, and it is, and he did get some success, granted. But what I did is I got him to change that whole sentence just to something a little bit more assumptive. And it's basically, which date is best for you? And the psychology behind this, because I studied this in college as well, so I became obsessed with how people are and why we do things the way we do them, is you've positioned yourself so that you can pass the power of the conversation over to the customer to actually allow them to feel like they have control in the buying decision. But you've created a structure where all paths, in this case 5, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, lead to you getting the type of solution that you want. There is a 6th option there, which is no thank you, but you've kind of removed that off the table and made it very, very hard for a customer to go down that unless it's very crystal clear that they're not interested. And what we found working with my partner is that it was much easier for him to roll off the tongue because he was being assumptive, he was being persuasive and influential, that it became a no-brainer. And instead of receiving 4 quarterly reviews, which he tried after a week, he got nearly 30.
And
And
that's a
still,
huge
yeah,
improvement, right? That's so much better. And it is because you're kind of skipping ahead in the process by you're going straight to that, which day is best for you. It's interesting you bring this up, Danny, because we coach this at Augmentt with a lot of our partners as well. We're heavily focused in the cybersecurity space, and even coming back to some of your slides around emotion and the timeline and assessing the interest, the budget. Those are all great qualifying factors, but I think when push comes to shove, when it kind of gets towards that end of the conversation, when it's time to close, more or less, this is what kind of really separates good salespeople from great salespeople, right? And it's almost having anticipating where the conversation could go and being able to steer it in that direction. To speak to my old horrible greasy phone selling days, that's what we were taught all the way back in 2010 as well. I said that you go into a shop, someone approaches you, what's the first thing that you say to get them to leave you alone? No thanks, I'm just looking. So we already knew that was going to happen. Our immediate response was, great, what is it you're looking for? So it's a positive thing. I get that's excellent. What is you looking for? And then it's not closed, so it's not yes or no. They'll be polite and answer you, and then you get a little tidbit of information that you can say, oh, it's a phone case there over here. What kind of phone do you have? Or, oh, your contract's about to expire and you're looking, and just kind of being able to keep the conversation going. So huge part of sales is almost planning the conversation out in advance, would you say?
Yeah, and this is my perspective, is that we all do this at home, but I love to make that connection. But there's been a time that we all have had where we go up to someone that we like and we find attractive, and we've got to ask them that difficult question. It's just putting yourself in that position where you're aware of what you're saying, and it's just very similar to when you have a car crash. When you need to get back into the car, you're hyper aware of where your hands should be, where your mirrors are. And so you drive exactly specifically how you should be based on day one, and then you just run with it. Sales is no different. You're absolutely right in that. It's just being aware of what the journey is and what you could say and what you can say. And another selection that I use is to do with the qualification stage. Is a lot of people just automatically say, how many do you need? Now, as a salesman, a lot of end users particularly hate this question, because it immediately signals to the salesman that if they say a number too much, they will get taken advantage of. And if they say a number too little, then they might be missing out on an incredible deal. So it's very, very hard to judge the specific right amount. So what we like to do, and what I like to do, is basically to change the language of this one too, which is, will a certain amount be enough? Because what you're doing is you're putting the influential language into that sentence. You can pick a figure out of the air and they'll give you a much better accurate reading based on their response. So you can say 100 of this, and if it's too high, they'll laugh you out the door and then they'll correct you instantly. If it's too low, they'll correct you again and give you the right amount. So it immediately can fill that void of
And
a
I
potentially
love this example, Danny. It's such a, because even with the last example, you notice, it's kind of, don't you ask closed-ended questions, and even Carrie in the chat there was saying, yeah, don't ask closed-ended questions. But here's a really good example of when it's appropriate, you can and maybe should use closed-ended questions to get sort of to the next stage of the conversation that you want, right? And yeah, so I love that example of will X be enough, because they're either going to say yes, that's great, okay, and then on to, well, okay, can I get your credit card information, or okay, I'm going to send you over the purchase order, we've got a verbal commit, or no, okay, well, great, a larger sale, how much is it that you need? You tell me. You're in control, Mr. Customer, right? You're kind of controlling this conversation, and we're not putting you in a corner. So I love this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an 80 trade. A lot of people talk about this. It's definitely no new plan, but the 80-20 ratio. So basically, as part of a conversation, it doesn't matter how long it may last, but there's always someone in 80% control, and it should flip from side to side to side as and when you're qualifying the lead and going through the whole negotiation process. So it's always nice to be aware of that, because you can say something that's just 4 words, but a response that the customer can provide can last 5 to 10 minutes if it's a very, very good, and they could do half of the qualifying for you, which is why it's
Let them
so,
talk as well, right? Don't be afraid. Like
yeah,
sometimes in sales, it's like the less you talk, the better, the better
yeah,
questions you can ask to uncover more information about your prospect or your current customers to find out what their
yeah.
needs are, the better position you're going to be in. And don't be afraid of awkward pauses as well.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to have calls as well, because this is one of my last points that I wanted to go through. The easy option now is to choose email because you can do it in bulk and the rejection is a lot easier to take. So what a lot of people, especially when they're IT focused, tend to do when it comes to trying to grow is to bulk send campaign after campaign after campaign. And there's very, very little personality, because what we all need to realize is, depending on how we are feeling in that given day, depends on how we could potentially read something. And we've all had situations at home where we've got a text come through or a WhatsApp, and you go, "Oh, is that actually?" And you check with your partner saying, "Am I reading that right?" And that's what I wanted to end on, because there's a very famous saying, especially among linguists, which is called, "I never said she stole my money." And basically, the key criteria here is you can emphasize just one of the 7 words, and the sentence will change in 7 different ways. And one thing that I always love to work with my partners on is to lead with calls. Emails are obviously incredibly important. They are there to be the evidence to what we've just communicated. So from my perspective, what I love to do is, when I'm having calls with customers, is to go through absolutely everything and then use my email for after the call, so that the end user knows I'm being transparent and there's no hidden agenda at play. If you're using emails, especially to try and get your personality across and to generate any type of interest, always think about the messaging you're using in the background, because a lot of it especially might not be your fault, but they can actually interpret it in lots of different ways based on the language that's used in the actual body of the email itself. And yeah, from my perspective, I love talking to customers, because 9 times out of 10, you can get the answers that you want to know much quicker than an email thread that can last like days and weeks and even months sometimes.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important that to use them both in tandem, though. I mean, one of the craziest stats, and I'm sure it's more now in this day and age as well, that I came across was, the number of touch points, so a phone call or an email, touch points, interactions, whatever you want to call them, with a prospect before realistically you can go, okay, this is a dead end. And the number at the time, which was still a couple of years ago, so it's probably more now, but was 23. So if you
yeah,
think about that, that's what, 10 calls and 13 emails to a particular prospect before you can say, okay, they're not interested. Because we've all been there, we get an email, we don't even read it, we delete it. Someone calls us, it's a bad day, it's a Monday morning, we're having a rubbish week, whatever it is. The next week it's the same person with the same idea or the same proposition, and we're just in a better mood, and so we'll give them 2 minutes of our time. If they do a good enough job in those 2 minutes, we'll give them an extra 20 minutes to book a call, right? And I'm sure there's MSPs on the line right now from dealing with other channel vendors that have a lot of stories they can share about great vendors that have reached out or continually pestered them, and ultimately they've become partners and had a great relationship moving forward. And there's probably ones that have really irritated them as well. So if anyone does have any cheeky comments, feel free to drop it in the chat. Just being cognizant of time, Danny, we did have a couple of questions come through. I wanted to just quickly for you to go back to your first slide about qualifying, just to touch on that again. So I feel like for IT experts that can often be extremely process driven when it comes to technical implementation, maybe this is part of the pieces that are missing when it comes to sales in particular. And I think the key thing here was around qualifying your leads. And I feel like that's such a step that a lot of MSPs miss. They buy a list, they build a list, and they just continually call or email or reach out to that list. And there's something to be said for actually taking the time to qualify those leads and find, you know, the diamonds in the rough. The question that came through was, is this the order specifically that you would go through things in particular? And from your work with MSPs, is there one or a couple key things here that you consistently see MSPs needing to appreciate more or work on more that they keep missing in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely not the order in which I asked it, because obviously it's very hard to predict the order in which your conversation is going to go. So what I like to do, especially when I'm working with partners, is to set the agenda where you need to uncover at least 3 of them as part of your first call. It's also very unpredictable that you'll get all 7 knocked out of the park, unless your customer is incredibly keen and a buyer on heat, i.e. knows exactly specifically what he needs and just needs to sign on the bottom line. It's very unlikely that you'll get all 7 uncovered as part of your first call. So what is going to be incredibly important for you is just to understand where your sweet spot is. And this is the reason why I say to pick 2 or 3, because that is why we live in a world which is very relational selling, which means it's not just a one-trick pony. You need to actually spend time to build on the rapport, build on the customer and the experience, and potentially have multiple calls. So one thing that I love to target my customers on is to basically try and focus on timeline. That's the one that usually messes up a lot of MSPs, because we've all got pipelines, and we've all had pipelines in the past where there's always one that got away, or there's always one that's just never coming in and it lasts months, if not years. I would try and get that nailed down as much as possible, because it's only going to help you to correctly identify where your pipeline is up to at the moment and accurately calculate where you're going to be. But yeah, when it comes to the natural conversation, you may well find, just based on the customer's needs, that the budget comes first, or the opportunity size comes first, or why you're unique becomes very adamant straight from the off. I would just try and aim for 2 or 3 as a starting point, and then during the next call, aim for another 2 or 3, and so on and so on and so on. And as you're going through the sales cycle and you start negotiating, you show them trials, you show them the product in more detail, you will probably find that these 7 details change slightly. They get more and more accurate as you going on. So that's the reason why I like to leave it open to interpretation, because everybody's different. They've all got different styles and different personalities. So some people will find it incredibly easy to get the timeline first. Some people will find it incredibly easy to get the budget first. For me, I just want you to focus on 2 or 3, and then that way, write them down, or save them in your CRM, because the next time that you go to make a call to that customer, you're already halfway there and you know exactly what you're missing.
Yes, and actually being able to cite some of those things in that follow-up call is an incredibly powerful tool as well. I mean, again, think about it from your own experience. If you pick up, who's this? Danny? What is it? Oh, you told me that, you know, you've got this upcoming timeline event so that's why I'm calling you back. There's a real need, blah, 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 blah. You're currently working with the competition, but you're looking elsewhere because of this particular pain point. Being able to quickly summarize all that shows, you know, that you were listening and can just instantly kind of ignite that conversation as well.
And just one little question. I didn't include it in the slide, and I know we're quite tight on time, but one question that really helps me when it comes to timeline is to ask, is this do you need this in place for a certain time frame, or is this future planning? Because you're basically giving them the whole scope to tell you accurately when specifically it is. If you say, is this by the end of the month, or is this coming, are you ready to place an order tomorrow, you'll basically just get avoided until their timeline actually comes up to it's hard to say really, but you can see the way I do things. It's very rogue, it's very raw, but I like to ask that situation just because you get a much more realistic and accurate answer. So is this future planning, or Do you need
Is it
this in
A or is
time
it
for?
B? Which one is it? Or is there
Yeah,
a third C option that's gone over my head? So,
yeah.
well, Danny, listen, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Just a couple of last things from me is one, for anyone who's found this valuable, please do feel free to tell your partners, your colleagues about it. It will be available online to access for free. The second thing is, if you've enjoyed as much as I have, sort of these real little nuggets of these key questions, Danny's book Sell More, Do Less is full of them. So it's such a good instructional book, but also in just things that you can literally rip a page out of and put straight into your own practice. The step by step, the word for word, all those bits and pieces are in there. So please do go check it out. Danny, last words from you. If there's something that an MSP should do effective immediately starting next Monday to kind of help sell more and do less. There's a lot of things we covered today, but what would you say is at the top of the list for you? Is it qualifying leads? Is it picking up the phone more? Is it working on your general rapport building skills? Like what's one thing that someone can do, an MSP specifically, next Monday to take a step forward?
I would focus specifically on the qualifying leads, purely because you guys are already having really good, strong connections and conversations on a day-to-day basis. If you're aware of the buying cycle, you'll be able to highlight specifically where they get the gaps of knowledge and also the gaps in their product stack you can easily fill. So I would incredibly just start a nice little process. Remember, it doesn't have to be War and Peace. It's not a Stephen King novel. It's simply just bullet points. So that you can easily remember and recognize time and time again in the future. And that will slowly but surely enhance your memory and your train of thought to focus more on cross-selling. And it should make a big, big difference in the outcome.
100% agree. Better making 5 consecutive calls to a qualified lead than 5 separate calls to random leads, right? Better use of your time.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. And again, thanks for your time as well, Danny. Really appreciate it. Last comment from you. If anyone does want to get a copy of your book, where can they go to grab it?
Yep, so it's available on Amazon. So if you just type in Danny Boyle book or Sell More, Do Less, you should be able to spot it. It is bright green, so you can't miss it. And I really do thoroughly hope that you guys enjoy it. I really would love as much feedback as possible. So you guys can reach out to me if you want via email at danny@dannyboyle.uk. Unfortunately, I can't have .co.uk because there's a more famous Danny Boyle in the UK. So I have to take the secondary option.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And again, thank you, Danny. That's it for now. And yeah, keep an eye out for the ebook that we'll be releasing that will be a combination of both our SaaSy Sales Part 1 with Joel Benge last week and Part 2 with Danny, where there will be a combination of some great insights shared by both around messaging and about selling more and doing less. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, guys.